that you can see that. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and we're going to talk about a couple things and then we'll open it up at the end to discuss any questions you have on the test. But one thing I want you to note, if you look in the chat, is this definition of brand, because we're going to talk about it today. So in that bottom part of the chat, it says a brand is a name, term, design, symbol, or any other feature that identifies one seller's good or service as distinct from those of other sellers. So if this sounds vaguely familiar, it's because it's what you had in your Principles of Marketing book and also in consumer behavior. I think from when I checked last, all prior professors use this definition. It's written by the American Marketing Association. So that definition, if we look at it, everything in that definition is controlled by the company. The company decides on the name, terms associated with it, the design of the product, the symbols that advertising connects to it, other features like pricing and placement, all these standard things you've talked about in all your classes. So keep that definition in mind. We're going to do a few preliminary things, and then we're going to come back to show how Doug Holt's definition of branding is different from that. So let me share my screen here for a second. Hopefully you can see that. Okay, so we're just going to go through an assignment that's looming way out there and in the future, and but I want to go ahead and talk about it now so that you know it's on your radar, and then the Doug Holt model, and then just a few particulars about Respondus Lockdown, which I am quite certain you are more expert on than I am, but we'll talk about that. Okay, first though, if you are not receiving remind texts from me, you should definitely reach out to the website if you've signed up and make sure that, and have them troubleshoot this. If you are a CEA student, I sent remind texts out Sunday and Monday because you have to sign up for a testing slot. And so if you have not done that yet, make sure you're checking your texts and that you, maybe you set up the remind to go to your email account instead of your text, but just definitely check that because it has to all be set up for testing. But also if there's a problem with Respondus or Blackboard, this remind system is what I'll use to get in touch with you. So if you're not getting texts from me, definitely troubleshoot that. Okay, so how many of you all have seen this documentary, The Social Dilemma? Is there anyone that has? Okay, well, that actually makes me so excited because you're gonna love it. I feel confident that this is gonna be your favorite, I guess we'll call it a reading. It's really a video of the whole semester. It's fascinating. It is, however, 90 minutes long. So we're doing this instead of reading articles for that week. And it's going to be what we discuss in class the first week in November. In order to have a good discussion the first week in November, I'm going to have you watch it and turn in some general thoughts about it on October 30th. So this is so far away. I mean, Halloween is what, 25 days from now? The reason I'm putting this up here now is that I've had 6 current students email me about this documentary and some thoughts. And if you are one of those that has seen it, I want to go ahead and give you the assignment while it's fresh in your mind now. I can also tell you that in my 30 years of teaching, I have never had more former students reach out to me about anything in marketing more than they have about this. My texts and emails are flooded with comments on this. So I really think you're going to love it. You'll watch the documentary and then you can pick any 2 of these 7 answers that are questions that are on the screen to answer. So you can really tailor the assignment to what you want. And then I think it's also important to know how Facebook is defending themselves against this documentary. And so I found Facebook's response, and you'll just read that and then kind of talk about 2 things that you think about with that response. So this is looming way out there on October 30th, but I wanted to give it to you now so that if you watch The Social Dilemma sooner, you can go ahead and do this and just drop it in Blackboard. Okay, so we're going to talk today about Doug Holt. So my first disclaimer is we don't have an article on Doug Holt the way we had an article on Jim Stingle, Kevin Roberts, Mark Ritson, Byron Sharp, all of those people. And it's not because he's not important. In fact, out of all the people we're talking about, he is absolutely my favorite. I think what he does in the world of branding is ingenious. And in Harvard Business Review did a very long, I think it was a 20-page article on him. And I've had my students read that in the past, but the reason I'm not assigning it to you all is that when I was going through and making up the test, I just thought y'all have enough to read. I'd rather we just talked through Doug Holt's model and then you can concentrate on the other readings. So don't take the lack of an article as a sign that I don't think it's important. It's simply that I think you have enough going on. Don't need another reading. Okay, so Doug Holt. He is a professor. I know we talked about this very briefly before Procter & Gamble Week when we were wrapping up branding, but as a reminder, professor at Harvard and at Oxford. And where one main way he differs from the people we've talked about already is that somebody like Mark Ritson came up through the business ranks. He's a professor of marketing at an institution. Byron Sharp is a professor of marketing in business. So their view of the brand is very grounded in business. It's grounded in that definition that I put up a minute ago from the American Marketing Association. Doug Holt is a social scientist. He believes that branding is cultural. Jim Stingle thinks branding is purpose. Kevin Roberts thinks that branding is love and respect, emotion. Doug Holt thinks branding is cultural, that you can't uncouple it. And we've seen an example just this week that I'll share with you that shows why his view is so important. But just going through it, and I know, again, we talked about this briefly 2 weeks ago, so it's a slide we're revisiting, but he views products as just products alone when they're introduced by a company. But as they move through the society, they start acquiring meanings. Sometimes those meanings are heavily laden with what the company has told you about them. And other times they're not, because you maybe don't listen to that company or you haven't been exposed to the product. So his entire view of branding is that they become brands in our mind once they've circulated in society and circulated through our lives. And then over time, that circulation creates meaning behind the brand. This all sounds very fluffy, right? But it will make sense by the time we get through. Okay, so he believes that what the company says about a brand is very important, but that it's only one author of the brand. So he thinks that a brand resides in our mind, and that how we think of a brand, like if I said to you Chick-fil-A, something immediately comes to your mind. If I say Snickers, something comes to mind. Arkansas Razorbacks, immediately you have thoughts. He thinks those thoughts that immediately come to mind are authored by 4 different groups. The first one, I think, is obvious. It's the company. I mean, you've studied as marketing majors and minors about the company, marketing tactics, segmentation, target marketing, websites, pricing, packaging, placement, promotions, all of that. That's all in that company voice. He believes just as important as that company voice is that consumers listen to other customers. So he has a customer voice. He thinks we listen to influencers on the internet. So there's that voice. And then last, he thinks that pop culture has a huge impact on how we process information and how we form opinions. And so that's the 4th voice. And together, those 4 voices form a brand image in our mind. So let's walk through each of these 4. The company, I'm not going to spend time on because it's, summarizing any class, marketing class you've had in the past: pricing, packaging, placement, promotion, etc. But let's look at how he defines the other ones, since they're not as familiar. He calls this second voice a customer, but look at the bottom bullet point. Really, it's customers and non-customers. It's anyone that talks to you directly about the brand or that talks where you can hear the conversation. So if I were to say, let's go to Snickers. I'm hungry still. So let's talk about Snickers. You know, you had, before the semester started, an image in your mind of the Snickers brand. I bet you could even close your eyes and picture what the Snickers packaging looks like. You can see it. But once I started telling you the story in class of how I get up at 3 a.m. and I eat my Snickers, that's like a whole different voice from a customer. And so that is feeding into your brand image. In fact, the way memory works, I've now said it so many times in class that probably 6 months from now, you're going to see a Snickers bar and you're going to think, my crazy marketing professor that eats those at 3 a.m. That customer voice resonates. So it can also be non-customers. So if somebody, and the day we were talking about Snickers, in one of the classes, somebody said, I don't like Snickers, I like a Three Musketeers. And we had, it wasn't your class, but we had a little argument about which is the best. So that was a non-customer injecting into that brand discussion. Okay, customers are personal face-to-face interactions, as opposed to influencers are all conversations that take place on the internet. Now, one thing that's important to note is that Doug Holt created this model before, he coined the term influencers before social media coined the idea of somebody having influence in social media as an influencer. I mean, the term influencer to all of us on this Zoom, I think we assume they mean somebody that's paid to promote products or to have that can hold sway over a large group of people. He doesn't narrow it down to that. He says an influencer is any voice on the internet. That's why in the bottom left of this slide, I capitalized influencer and then internet to remind you that his take is that it's all comments, any comment at all, good or bad, made available through the internet. So if you read a review on Anthropologie, TripAdvisor, Amazon, and you don't know the people, they're not a paid influencer, that's still in his influencer box because it took place on the internet. Okay, the last voice, which is where I think he really separates himself from some of these other people, is pop culture. He thinks that our impression of brands are influenced by pop culture, and that brands can also influence pop culture, that it's bi-directional in that sense. He defines pop culture very broadly: people, books, movies, trends. We have this whole healthy eating trend, which is painful to somebody that loves Snickers. I see things about eating healthy and organic and pure foods and non-GMO, and I think, I'm getting up at 3 a.m. and eating a Snickers. I mean, definitely that trend impacts my thoughts about the Snickers brand. You can't really untangle it. And I think that's something he inserts into the brand conversation that's different from the people we've talked about before. Okay, so let's look at all this together. These are his 4 voices. This is his brand model. These are the 4 voices he talks about and a summary of each one. So this would be a great chart to know. But we haven't really defined the brand yet. I mean, we know the voice is the brand, but we don't know what he means by brand. We do know that it's not what AMA says it is in his view. It's not what I put in the chat. So before we get to his definition, I want to say he sees these as 4 kinds of voices, but they're not mutually exclusive. As marketing majors and minors, we know that if an influencer's out there talking about a brand, really that's the company. The company's paying them to do it. So you can't, these aren't mutually exclusive. So this is what life looks like. Doug Holt is saying it's nice and neat, these 4 boxes, but really it's all these messages hitting us through, I guess most of you are probably 22 years old, 21. Through your 21 years of living, you have all these messages that hit. You see the company at different parts. Some of you follow their Instagram, some go to their website, some don't have any interaction with the company message at all. Some people love Chick-fil-A, some hate it. I mean, all these voices feed into the brand and form together. Now, one last comment I want to give about his version of branding is that he thinks a brand is sticky. That stickiness is an important concept. So he says, where I have the word brand written here, that it's sticking to different parts of the conversation. So, you know, I love Snickers, but a couple of years ago, there was a scandal with, I can't even remember now what it was, but some problem with the factory at Snickers. I think it says a lot that I don't remember exactly what it is. And so if you think of that, my vision of the Snickers brand is so sticky that I don't pay attention to negative things. I would have to hear so many negative things before it would infiltrate my sticky version of the Snickers brand. And that's kind of different than anything we've talked about before, this idea of stickiness. It really goes back to, remember in consumer behavior, you had this concept of cognitive dissonance. We tend to only hear things that reinforce our current beliefs. And that's kind of where he's coming at. Okay, so this is his model. We know that in the marketplace, it really plays out more like this, where it's just all one mesh over 21 years of life for you, 57 years of life for me on this old person's birthday today. And so this is the brand for authors. But let's look at his exact definition. Shared, this is his definition of the brand. This will be on your test. I'm giving you a question for the test. Shared, taken for granted, brand stories, images, and associations. That's how he defines the brand. Let's see, Jacob. So I can't actually see the chat. So would you unmute and read that definition of the brand from the AMA that's in there?
Yes. It's a brand is a name, term, design, symbol, or any other feature that identifies one seller's good or service as distinct from those of other sellers.
Great. Okay, let's think about that. That is so tactical in nature. And then look at this kind of fluid, vague, touchy-feely definition that Doug Holt has. Shared, taken for granted, brand stories, images, and associations. It's hard to even decide what that means. But what it means is that over a period of time, as products circulate through society, you start listening to different voices of those brands, and parts of them stick with you, parts of them don't. And it forms this kind of shared, taken for granted idea of what the brand is. I think it's going to help if we look at an example of this. But as a reminder, before that example, so not grounded in business, grounded in the social sciences, brands are products that acquire meanings as they circulate in society. They become truths that you either hold to yourself or maybe share with other people. Maybe there's some weird person out there that uses Snickers as their 3 a.m. snack, so I share that truth with them. Most likely, there's not, and I just hold that as at the individual level. Okay, so how many of you watched the show This Is Us? Okay, so I'm really sorry if you are binge watching it now, because I'm telling you a key part of it, that the character, Jack, is killed, one of the lead characters, when his crock pot in the 1970s has a faulty design and catches on fire. So prior to this, Crock-Pot was the most recognized, loved, and respected name in slow cookers. People didn't even say, I'm going to use a slow cooker. Your parents probably have a Crock-Pot in their home, and they would say, I'm going to cook it in the Crock-Pot. I mean, it's almost like a verb, like a Swiffer. So this show comes out. People are devastated that Jack, this lead character, dies, and they're angry with Crock-Pot. Now, people are not rational. So they literally started sending hate messages in social media to crock pot. It was absurd. It was one of my favorite semesters to teach because we were watching this unfold during the semester. So people would send these hate messages to Crock-Pot. They would return their crock pots to Walmart. It was one of the most returned items in Walmart's history. Potter's House here in town actually put signs up on their windows that said, not accepting donations of used crock pots, because they had so many and people weren't buying them. So this was this one TV show that has nothing to do with crock pot. They just picked a random product to catch on fire. This TV show impacted Crock-Pot immensely through what people were saying as they talked about the show, what influencers were saying on social media, what was happening in pop culture. I mean, look at some of these posts that people made. Top right, Elizabeth Judd. I hope you guys have an awesome Super Bowl commercial ready for a fireproof crock pot after that This Is Us episode has everyone throwing away their crock pots. So Crock-Pot started saying, oh my gosh, we've got to respond to these. So they said, Jack is our Valentine. This happened on Valentine's Day. So we understand your pain, but know that Crock-Pots are reliable. They have been generationally tested. So they're Crock-Pot's defending their brand. It got so out of hand that Crock-Pot had to create an entirely new handle, Crock-Pot Cares, just to control the stream of information. We would love to send you one of our amazing slow cookers and our favorite recipes. They're giving away crock pots in order to make people feel good about it. Here we have in the top left, Jack was one of our favorites too. Don't worry, you can still make food. They then did a collaboration with One Country to pay other people to inject their voice into this as an influencer. So One Country did a paid promotion where they said, we took a poll in the office and decided Jack really couldn't be killed by a crock pot. 10 out of 10 will still use it. This went on for literally months. Again, just a good example of how pop culture can impact a brand overnight. We've seen it with Tiger Woods. We've seen it with all kinds of celebrities and musicians. Ariana Grande when she was in the donut store. I mean, we've seen it over and over how these random pop culture events can impact the brand themselves. So it all comes back to these shared, taken for granted stories, images, and associations. I'm going to give you one more example that just happened this past week, and that's with with President Trump being diagnosed with COVID. If you think about it, I don't know how many of y'all watched the debate that the Cleveland Clinic sponsored, but in the week leading up to that debate, Cleveland Clinic did one of their largest ad buys in their history. They are the second ranked hospital in the world behind Mayo. So they did all these ad buys saying, we've been chosen to host the presidential debate. We are leading in the medical field. They talked about their knowledge base, safety, etc. So then the debate happens, and then President Trump is diagnosed with COVID. Now, to my knowledge, there is no scientific proof that it happened at the debate. It could have happened at the Amy Coney Barrett nomination. It could have happened any of the hundreds of places and people that President Trump came in contact with, but a lot of people started voicing concern about the Cleveland Clinic on social media. If you Google it, you're going to see all of these people who are saying, I'm not going to Cleveland Clinic. They couldn't even keep the president safe. It's absurd. It's irrational, but it is a great example of an external event impacting a brand that the company has worked so hard to promote. So I love the Doug Holt model because I think we see it play out every single day. Before we jump into talking about the test, do y'all have any questions about that model? Okay, so a couple quick things about the test. If you have not used Respondus Lockdown, would you please put that in the chat so that I can reach out to you? I'm assuming everyone has as seniors, but put it in the chat. If you haven't used it, there's a guide on the tips site. Also at the bottom, there's the number that you call if you have any trouble at all setting it up. Definitely, if you haven't used it before, set it up today or tomorrow before the test on Thursday morning. I've put a guide up on Blackboard. I think I put it up last week. As a reminder, there are 50 multiple choice questions worth 2 points each and 50 points of short answer. I think that'll probably be like 3 or 4 questions. I haven't made up the short answer yet. The multiple choice is done. Okay, couple things I want to clarify on the sheet that's on your left side of your screen. Initially, I have not done Respondus Lockdown before. I like giving tests in class when I can be there answering questions of students, but clearly we can't do that now. Our chancellor has said no in-class tests. And so I reached out to some people I admire, like John Cole, and he said, you can typically have one multiple choice question for 1 minute of class. I think his test last week had 75 questions, 75 minutes of class. Because this is just part of your test, I decided to not use that model, which I was initially planning on 40 minutes of class. Instead, I have 50 questions and you just have the full class time to take it, the hour and 15 minutes. So you'll have that. And a second thing I want to point out that's different than the slide I posted is if you go down to where it says the testable sources, it mentions week 7 Doug Holt article. As a reminder, don't go scrambling looking for that article. I decided not to assign one, so one fewer article to read for the test. And let's see. These are standard instructions. If you've done Respondus before, you know all of this. The main thing that I think could be different is I do not auto-submit tests, so you'll have to hit the submit button to submit that. These instructions will be up on the site as well. I'm sorry, my dogs are going nuts. Okay. Last, when you go to Blackboard on Thursday morning, the test is available only during your class time, 9:30 to 10:45 on Thursday. And you'll just look for that 9:30 link. Your names have been attached to it. If you're a CEA student and you've completed the survey that I sent out, then yours is adjusted for that. And you'll just click on that and enter and start taking the test. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing this screen and I'm gonna pause for 1 minute because I wanna make sure my dogs are in the fence because this is sounding very loud. I'll be right back, but I want you to think of questions and that I can answer on the test. 1 second. Okay, sorry, we had somebody standing outside our fence. That's random. Okay, Cassandra, is the way I can look and see what slot we signed up for? Yes. Cassandra, will you send me a text on the Remind system and I'll send it back to you? Okay. Other questions?
Is the Doug Holt person we just learned about, is that going to be on this test or the next one?
This test.
Okay. All right.
Yes, but limited only to this, 15 minutes we use to cover it.
Okay.
Well, I have 2 thoughts on the test I'll share. The one is, historically, I think this is not just my class, but every class, probably every class you've had, you tend to have your lowest score on the first test in any given class because you're learning what that professor's looking for. I think it's particularly true of my class because there's not a test bank floating out there of questions, things like that, because every article except for Love Marks is new to you all. This semester, we didn't have students testing on it in the past. So one thing I want you to think about is the fact that this semester, we have 1/3 of our test points assigned to, or 1/3 of our course points are assigned to these assignments. I've never done that before. The most I've ever given is 20% of your course grade is from these small assignments. I bumped it up to an entire 1/3 of your course grade being these assignments because this is a crazy semester. This whole Zoom and hybrid and people being sick or people having roommates that are sick, it's just stressful. And so know that if tests stress you out, that you're in a class where 1/3 of your course grade is coming from assignments that are very controllable. you also have the final exam out there. I'd love it if, as seniors, you don't have to take the final exam, but it's out there and you can take it to replace any test score that you're not happy with. No one's asking it here, but I want to give you the same information I gave my other students. I had in both sessions this morning, they asked again about best advice on how to study and what to, and then Jacob, I'll come back to your question in a second. Best advice on what to study. And I would really focus on the articles and know that I have 3 layers of questions. Very top line. If you glanced at the article and paid attention in class, you would be able to answer the question, I think. Something like, what is Kevin Roberts known for? I mean, how many times have we now talked about that? You have the article, we had the slides, we had Andy Murray, we had in your class, I said, think of one sentence that captures Kevin Roberts. I think that's a great kind of top line question that I'm expecting every student will get correct. I'd be shocked, sad if you didn't. Then there's a mid-level question. So from Love Marks, that would be asking something a little more detailed, like about the love-respect axis. That's something we talked about, but there's more detail to that than simply what does Kevin Roberts stand for. The part of that I would really encourage you to focus on is that third kind of question, which is really more detailed. The multiple choice is an objective, detailed test. Concepts, terms, what is Jim Stingle known for, that kind of thing. And so make sure that you're reading the meat of the article. That, for example, in Love Marks, an example of a detailed question would be if you knew what makes up, that mystery, sensuality, and intimacy make up the love side of that equation. You know, that's something more detailed that you may not know those 3 words right off the bat if all you did was just listen in class. Going to Jacob's question. So I love the final exam, Jacob. It is not cumulative, but it does have material from throughout the semester. So I'll pick the same amount of material as what you have on test 1 and test 2, but it'll be all material you've covered before, and I give you a list of the articles so that you know exactly what it's coming for, so that you don't study everything. So before we jump on into the people who are joining us from the 10:05 session, do those of you on this one have any other questions? Okay, well, giving tests and grading tests, my least favorite part of the class. We're going to get it over with Thursday. And then next week, we're jumping into shopper marketing and have some fun things planned, I think. So hope you guys have a great day. And I'm going to jump on with my next. And thank you for the birthday wishes there. Swing dancing with my husband tonight and then having dinner at Herman's. So that's a good 57th. Okay, I will see you all online Thursday for that test. See ya.